Are you struggling to be concentrated in your Vipassana practice at home and you just can't quite get that 10-day experience where your mind was just so sharp and so open, right? This can be very challenging, but today I'm going to share and highlight some of the specific instructions that Goenka gave that I personally use to have a really good focus practice. Is it as good as day 8, 9, 10 or day 8 and 9 on a 10-day course where the mind is so sharp and focused? It's not that good, but it is much better than not using these techniques and these specific instructions that Goenka gave during the 10-day course. So stick around and I'll guide you step by step through sort of how I process those instructions and understand those instructions and how they help me go much, much deeper. And then you'll also know how to use these instructions and techniques to help yourself out. This whole thing comes from getting distracted. I'm focused, and in the real world, there's just so much experiences that we have in the day to day that distractions are a lot easier to come up. There's so many things to think about. Whereas on a 10-day course, right, the first few days, yes, it's like super, super distracting as well, at least for me. But then by a few days in, it's like my mind runs out of fuel to get distracted with, and it kind of becomes repetitive and boring, and it becomes a lot easier to like be concentrated on a 10-day course. But in life, in real life, every day there is new food for your mind to eat, things that happen in the day. So it is a lot harder to remain focused. So the first principle and the first instruction or the first description that Goenka gives that really stuck out to me and that I use to really deepen my practice and my concentration in Vipassana is Goenka says many times throughout the course, the discourses, especially in the beginning, is this idea of the smaller the area of awareness, the deeper or the sharper the mind is bound to become. Yes, that's what he says. The smaller the area of awareness, the sharper the mind is bound to become, or something along those lines. And so, in when we start Anapana, we start with this triangle at the very top of the nose down to the corners of the lips, and then anything in this triangle we focus on. Then, our awareness gets smaller and smaller until we land on just this area right here on, the third and half of the fourth day when we're doing Anapana. And it's here, focusing on this much smaller area than the original big space, that we start to be able to sense these subtler sensations, right? These, different ways to feel them. So this is a very important principle to understand, I've found, right, in my practice. And it is the equivalent of, progressive load in workouts. And basically, for any people that don't know, essentially, you start working out, let's say you start lifting 30 pounds. You do that a couple weeks and you get stronger. So you move that to 35 pounds and then 40, 50, 60, 100, on and on. You keep increasing the weight because your muscles adjust. They get strong by the weight that's challenging, and then they get stronger. And so you then have to do more challenge and then more and more. And that's how you increase and keep the stress and the, stress on your muscles. That sounds weird in a mental world. You don't want extra stress, but the same principle applies, but instead of lifting heavier weights in Vipassana, or just in meditation in general, it's making the area of awareness smaller and smaller and smaller, right? And that is one principle that I really apply to my body scanning technique, right? In Vipassana, if I make my awareness super big, 5-10 inches, and I'm just scanning very big chunks, I find it's a lot easier to get distracted, and it's much harder to be focused, right? And so my aim when I'm going part by part, piece by piece, is to have a small enough area that there is some effort needed to sustain focus there, right? So let's say I have a 3-inch circle of awareness that I'm using to scan, right, part by part like this, if I make that 3 inches, 2 inches, that, like requires much more focus and effort. And it makes my meditations much better when I'm not working on such a big area, right? I make the area a little bit smaller, and it just really helps me maintain more focus during my 1-hour sits, right? And sometimes this first principle, generally I keep my awareness the size of about this big, like 1 square inch, basically, is how much 1 circular inch or whatever you want to call it. And I find that's a really good size to be able to observe sensations. And when I go much, much deeper in the concentration builds, it gets even smaller than that. Now, the second one is adjusting the scanning speed, right? Adjusting how fast you're scanning. So in my experience, there's 2 distinct, let's say, speeds that I distinguish between. One of them is, let's say, when I'm doing a sweep. It takes about 30 seconds to go through, the whole body, sometimes 10 seconds, 15 seconds, right? It's a matter of, it's a very short time to just like sweep and mass, as Goenka says in the instructions. And that's how I interpret it. It's just like literally going whole body parts at a time. So there's on one end, there's that. And then on the other end, there is the part by part, and this, takes definitely 10, 20, 30, an hour to do a whole body scan, right? This is much longer than the like sweeps, the sweeping en masse. And so within this, right, when I say to speed up, I don't mean going from part by part, inch by inch to the sweeping. What I mean is, if you're going like, let's say this speed, going part by part, then you just go a little bit faster, so that if it takes you 20 minutes to do a body scan, now it's going to take 15 minutes, right? It's just like increasing the speed by 10% or 20%, and not necessarily jumping from 20 minutes to do a scan to 20 seconds, right? That's not the speed that I'm talking about. And so staying within this part by part, 10, 20, however long it might take you, and just adjusting it 10% to either end, either slowing down by 10% so that your 20-minute scan now takes 25 minutes or 30 minutes, or doing the opposite, where if it's 20, now it's taking 15, right? And playing around with that really helps. And for both of these things, whether it's playing around with the size of your awareness, the area that you are scanning part by part with, or whether it's a slight increase or decrease in speed, it's really helpful to keep in mind that sometimes, these things, sometimes your mind will just be racing, will be racing a whole lot, and you will have to do a lot of sweeps, or you'll have to go back to Anapana, or you'll have to do other stuff. And so these aren't, when your mind allows, when your mind is calm and you can go part by part, right? This is when you implement these techniques that I'm talking about. If you've got some like emotional trauma that really happened in the day, and there's just heavy storms in your mind, and you can't even feel sensations, and you can't even implement this, it's all right to do Anapana. It's all right to do intentional breathing. It's all right to do all these other things. And so these are just applied to when your mind is calm, and it's just those like minor distractions that come and go, and it's just hard to like maintain where you're like somewhat focused, but then somewhat like over here, over there. So those are the times when these are implemented. And the other really important thing to understand, right? When you catch yourself distracted, I use it as a signal to implement one of these techniques. And I will also share another technique right after I explain this. Is really important to use that as a trigger, right? So in my experience, when I get distracted, I'm like, all right, I'm 100% going back. Going back to the sensation. Let's say I was scanning here on my shoulder, and then a distraction came, and I'm, doing, I'm in the mind doing all this stuff. And then I'm aware that I'm distracted, and then I come back. And I do that with, grace, with equanimity, with the understanding that the mind thinks and it's okay for the mind to think and to feel and to do all these things. And at the same time, I am meditating and I got to return. And so once I return with equanimity and just understanding, I also use it as a trigger to be like, let me change something. Maybe it's how big my area of awareness is. Maybe that's what I need to change, or maybe I need to slightly speed up or slightly slow down what it is. And that is, a great opportunity to use distractions to try to implement these two different things. And now the third specific instruction, and more like a meta thing, and it's a bunch of things that Goenka said here and there that I just put together to understand it as such, is to really prioritize sensations, right? And that seems obvious, right? Vipassana is observing awareness and physical sensations. That's what Vipassana is. So it sounds very obvious. So what do I mean by prioritizing physical sensations? So in general, there are two things that are happening when we are doing Vipassana, and they both feel like sensations, but they're two different sensations. Let me explain. One of them is the movement of awareness, right? So if I'm like scanning here, there is the feeling, if I'm like going like this, there's the feeling of the movement of my awareness, right? Just imagine my hand is my awareness. There's the feeling of the movement of self, and there's the feeling of directing the awareness. There's the feeling of how big the awareness is. How big is the circle of awareness? Is it huge or is it tiny? So awareness itself, right, has a sensation that we feel. It's more of a mental sensation. And then on the other hand, is the physical sensation itself, right? What is actually physically happening that I am sensing, right? When I'm sensing my shoulders and I'm sensing all these sensations, right? Whether it's tingling, whether it's popping, whether it's whatever sensations it might be. It was really huge for me to understand the distinction between these two, right? And to really know when I'm practicing, okay, what is the feeling of the movement of my awareness? And what is the actual feeling of the physical sensations which I am observing? And as Goenka says, right, this where literally the goal is to observe physical sensations, right? That is Vipassana, is you're using sensations in the body. And he describes sensations as anything that you really feel that's physical. So what tends to happen, right, is if you feel the movement of sensation more than the actual sensation, then you're kind of missing Vipassana, right? You're missing a good chunk of Vipassana. And, I got this from Day 4 Discourse. There's a question asked, this is the day Vipassana instructions are given on a 10-day course. There's a question that's asked that's like, how fast should I scan my body? That was one of the questions. And he starts off, saying, you shouldn't scan so fast that you're not feeling and you're missing so many sensations. Then you're not even practicing Vipassana. You've like missed Vipassana entirely. Right? And this is really what happens when we prioritize the movement of the awareness, and that's all that we're feeling, or the majority of what we're feeling, and we're not actually feeling the majority of our physical sensations, then you're missing the practice, right? And so from this principle and just these things that he's saying, it's super important. I have this principle in mind when I'm always practicing, in which the feeling of physical sensations has to be more than 50% compared to the feeling of the movement of my awareness. So what does that look like, right? It just means like I'm scanning here. I want to feel the actual physical sensations, like I want to feel my cheek more, at least 51% compared to me moving my awareness. So if I'm moving my awareness really, really fast, then it's like the majority of what I'm feeling is the movement of my awareness. And then if I'm moving, a bit slower, if I'm moving my awareness a bit slower, I'll be able to feel the sensations, the physical sensations, much more. right? And, it's not to go to an extreme and say, well, I won't move my awareness at all, and I'll just do, like samadhi, like anapana, when we're just focusing on here. It's like you're just limiting to feeling stuff right here, and that is all that you do. That is one extreme, although I will say that is a lot better than going so fast up and down that you're not feeling sensations. It's better to focus on, to not move your sensation at all and just focus on one spot, which is what we do for 3 days anyway. However, this is, exploring the whole body field. So you do have to move your sensations. I would err on the side of, I generally try to go for 70 to 80%. I need to feel physical sensations. And then 20 to 30% is the movement of my awareness, right? And this is a really important lesson, right? And I just want to talk one more thing about the jhanas. Jhana just basically means you're absorbed. You're absorbed in whatever that you're doing, right? Imagine, you're watching a movie or you're doing something very enjoyable and you enter a state of flow, right? You just enter this state where everything is just happening so smoothly and so nicely, and you're just very engaged, very, very much in it. And time just goes by super fast and you're just so absorbed. So it's possible to experience that, right, with any meditation, basically, especially anapana, especially Vipassana as well. I've on long courses, on 10-day courses, I, can go an hour without getting any distractions, and I'm just so absorbed in observing my sensations and really doing the practice that I'll have just longer and longer periods of no distraction, right? And you might have experienced that, right? You might have been able to, for 10 minutes, have no distractions at all and just be in the process, or an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, right? It just like goes on and on. And this is really important for the practice, right? Because it's when you're observing and you're aware of sensations and when you're actually meditating and doing the practice, right? The jhanas just means, instead of, just being focused, one second distraction coming back, instead of having like this constant choppiness and maybe just staying in thoughts a lot and coming just for a little bit and thoughts a lot and coming a little bit, you're turning it so that, oh, I am concentrated a little bit longer, oh, distracted, oh, come back longer. And it's just stretching out this concentration and the moments and the amount of time that you're focused on it. Super important, because this is where the actual practice is, right? Like Vipassana isn't like a lot of meditations aren't, just think, just be distracted, just let whatever happen. Well, some of them do that, but that's just, I don't know why they call that meditation. That's just, if I just sat and did nothing, that would happen. But anyway, let that go. So in Vipassana, it's really important to focus on sensations for longer and longer periods of time as you develop. And these 3 techniques that I mentioned, right, allows me to reach these states much easier, especially on the long course, the 10-day course, or even longer courses. But at home, when I'm practicing in the morning and in the evening, it allows me to be much more focused than I would be otherwise, than if I don't implement these, right? And so just to recap, the three techniques, right? One of them is playing around with your awareness, the size of your awareness. How big is it? And generally trying to go small enough that you start to feel a little tension, where it's like a little hard to focus this small, right? You can try it right now. If you just try to feel your whole face, it doesn't take a lot of effort. And then if you just try to feel half an inch right here, that just requires a little more balance, little more input. And you might not even be able to do like half an inch. So it's just finding your own, whether that's 2 inches, whether it's 1 inch, whether it's 5 inches. Find that area that challenges you slightly, but is still comfortable. And so that's one of the techniques, is just playing around with the area. And then the other one is slightly increasing the speed or decreasing the speed in which you scan at, right? And just that creates just a little bit enough of a challenge that you're not doing things monotonously and it's getting kind of boring. And again, you want that same thing of, you want there to be just a little bit more effort, a little bit more tension in increasing or decreasing your speed to keep that engagement and to keep strengthening your practice and your awareness and your concentration. And then the third one is really just keeping that principle and that understanding that this is Vipassana is a practice of observing physical sensations, and through physical sensations, observing anicca, anatta, dukkha, all these kind of things. But as a tool, as the tool of meditation, we're using physical sensations. And so comparing that to awareness, the movement of awareness, you just want the feeling of the physical sensation to take up more experiential space than the movement of awareness. I would recommend something along 70% of what you feel should be actual physical sensations, and 30% can be the movement of your awareness, right? And so these three things will really help you, as they've helped me, have much more concentrated meditation experiences, make your morning sits and evening sits much better. Now, I do not say that you'll be as concentrated as you will be on a 10-day course. You know, of course, there's just so much new information for your brain to be distracted with, but you should feel more concentrated than if you did not do these things. So try it out. And if you like this video, check out this other video. Take care.